Vincent Astor Montgomery knew the precise, suffocating weight of being completely invisible in a room overflowing with New York City's most elite society. At 42 years old, he had long accepted the bitter reality that his state-of-the-art wheelchair functioned as an impenetrable, unspoken barrier, a heavy steel wall separating him from the vibrant, careless pulse of Manhattan. The wealthy attendees at his philanthropic foundation's annual charity gala deliberately avoided his gaze as if his physical paralysis might somehow infect their flawlessly curated, incredibly privileged lives, leaving him to quietly observe the glittering city's skyline from the shadowed edges of the grand ballroom. Jessica Sterling, a prominent Upper East Side socialite, desperate to maintain her highly publicized, inclusive image, approached him with a practiced, utterly hollow smile plastered across her face. She loudly suggested they pose for one quick photograph together to post on her social media accounts, transparently aiming to showcase her charitable, open-minded nature to her hundreds of thousands of followers. However, the precise moment the hired photographer raised his heavy camera lens, she awkwardly backed away, muttering shallow excuses about the wheelchair taking up too much space and completely ruining the aesthetic composition before swiftly vanishing back into the swirling crowd. Moments later, Chloe Norton, the relentlessly ambitious daughter of a powerful state senator, stopped by his side with a nervous team of sharply dressed political assistants hovering closely nearby. She spoke rapidly and enthusiastically about a massive potential real estate development project in Brooklyn. Yet her eyes constantly darted nervously over his head, actively avoiding any form of direct, meaningful eye contact. When Vincent politely and calmly suggested scheduling a formal business meeting for the following week in his office, she vaguely agreed with forced cheerfulness, though they both inherently understood her executive secretary would never actually place that promised phone call. Even Robert Franklin, a brash and notoriously arrogant real estate tycoon, treated Vincent with a deeply patronizing lack of fundamental human respect when he finally paused to offer a greeting. Robert shouted his words painfully slowly and incredibly loudly, mystically assuming that a severe physical disability inherently meant Vincent had also lost his hearing capabilities and basic cognitive functions. Vincent calmly but firmly corrected the oblivious man, noting in a measured tone that his hearing was perfectly fine, which only caused the flustered, embarrassed businessman to make a hasty, ungraceful retreat toward the crowded open bar, exhausted by the endless, draining parade of silent pity and aggressive superficiality. Vincent prepared to leave the lavish venue and return to the suffocating, echoing silence of his massive penthouse. Just as he expertly pivoted his motorized chair toward the exit, the lively string quartet began playing a gentle waltz, and elegantly dressed couples gracefully filled the center of the polished dance floor. He watched the swirling gowns and tailored suits with a familiar, deep ache of profound exclusion, knowing with absolute certainty that he would never be invited to partake in such a simple, joyful human tradition. Suddenly, a small 5-year-old girl with bouncy, untamed curls and a simple, faded cotton dress wandered fearlessly into the very center of the lavishly decorated, brightly lit ballroom. She gazed at the sparkling crystal chandeliers, the towering floral arrangements, and the elegantly dressed guests with wide, entirely unbothered eyes, delightfully oblivious to the rigid, unspoken rules of high society. Her modest clothing sharply contrasted with the sea of designer gowns and expensive silk tuxedos. Yet she moved with an innate, confident grace that immediately captured Vincent's undivided attention. Instead of staring with nervous fear or asking the painfully inappropriate questions that most young children instinctively blurted out, the little girl locked her bright eyes with Vincent's and offered him the brightest, most genuine smile. She confidently marched right up to his heavy wheelchair, tilted her head to the side with pure, unfiltered curiosity, and bravely extended her tiny, delicate hand toward him. In a clear, incredibly sweet voice that magically seemed to cut straight through the ambient noise of the crowded gala, she simply asked if he would like to share a dance with her. The entire extravagant ballroom seemed to freeze in collective, breathless shock as Mary Foster, 29-year-old commercial cleaner working the chaotic event, rushed forward with sheer, unfiltered panic heavily etched across her exhausted face. Terrified of losing the meager income she desperately needed to survive, Mary frantically apologized, breathlessly explaining she had explicitly told her daughter Abigail to remain securely hidden in the bustling catering kitchen. Vincent looked at the terrified mother, and then down at the innocent child, who had just offered him a moment of profound humanity, gently assuring Mary that no harm had been done, and feeling an unfamiliar, warm spark of hope illuminating his deeply lonely existence. 2 days later, the strict regional manager of the commercial cleaning service received a highly unusual, incredibly direct phone call from one of the city's wealthiest, most reclusive billionaires. Vincent Astor Montgomery explicitly and specifically demanded that Mary Foster be permanently reassigned from her general commercial duties to become the exclusive, full-time housekeeper for his private Manhattan penthouse. The seasoned management team was completely bewildered by the specific request, as elite clients rarely ever learned the real names of their invisible cleaning staff, but nobody dared to question the lucrative demands of the powerful Montgomery estate. When Mary nervously received the unexpected reassignment from her boss, a deep, terrifying wave of anxiety completely washed over her, making her heart pound frantically against her ribs. She immediately assumed the powerful billionaire had maliciously changed his mind and intended to formally reprimand her in person for Abigail's innocent, rule-breaking disruption at the high-profile charity event. Despite her crippling fear of facing the powerful man and potentially facing a devastating lawsuit, she desperately needed the weekly paycheck to keep a tiny roof over their heads, so she bravely accepted the intimidating new assignment. The following morning, Mary carefully dressed Abigail in her cleanest, most presentable outfit, meticulously packing a small canvas bag of cheap crayons and scrap paper to keep the energetic 5-year-old quietly occupied. They rode the crowded subway from their modest neighborhood to the incredibly wealthy Upper East Side, navigating past stern, unsmiling security guards and riding a private, mirrored elevator directly up to the top floor. When the polished doors silently slid open, Vincent was already patiently waiting in the expansive foyer in his wheelchair, greeting them with a soft, incredibly welcoming demeanor that immediately miraculously eased Mary's heavy tension. Vincent guided them into the sprawling, impeccably clean living room, its massive floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking, uninterrupted panoramic view of the bustling, endless city stretching out far below them. He frankly and honestly explained that he was offering Mary a permanent, stable position at exactly double her current hourly salary, complete with full health benefits, paid time off, and absolute job security. The sudden, incredibly generous offer left Mary utterly speechless and completely paralyzed with shock, her mind racing desperately to understand why a man of his immense stature would do something so extraordinarily kind for a total stranger. However, Vincent gently raised his hand to pause her stammering gratitude, carefully explaining that his generous financial offer came with one strict, absolutely non-negotiable condition that she had to follow without fail. He firmly required Mary to bring Abigail with her to the penthouse every single working day, quietly confessing that the child's pure, completely unprejudiced kindness had profoundly touched his terribly lonely heart. Realizing the powerful billionaire was not a threat, but merely a deeply isolated man desperate for genuine human connection, Mary wiped a stray tear from her cheek and softly agreed to his life-changing proposal. Within one single week, the formerly sterile, emotionally cold, and echoing penthouse was thoroughly and wonderfully transformed by the vibrant, unstoppable energy of a curious, endlessly joyful little girl. Abigail fearlessly explored every lavish corner of the massive residence, constantly asking Vincent millions of questions about his massive personal library, the towering city skyline, and the complex, fascinating mechanics of his heavy motorized wheelchair. Instead of finding her exhausting or intrusive, Vincent quickly discovered that answering her endless questions and actively listening to her animated, imaginative stories brought an unprecedented, beautiful rhythm and profound joy to his quiet daily routine. One rainy afternoon, Abigail pulled a sheet of cheap, colorful, $1 stickers from her small canvas backpack, excitedly asking if she could decorate his expensive, custom-built medical chair to make it look happier. Although the sleek imported medical equipment was worth significantly more than a luxury sports car, Vincent simply smiled, a genuine smile, and gave her full, enthusiastic permission to turn it into her personal, colorful canvas. Soon, the dark metal frame was proudly adorned with bright pink flowers, shiny golden stars, and smiling cartoon butterflies, transforming his greatest physical barrier into a beautiful, undeniable symbol of their blossomed friendship. The next morning, Abigail proudly presented Vincent with a hand-drawn picture featuring a simple stick figure man in a flowery wheelchair, standing happily beside a small girl beneath a massive, bright yellow sun. For the very first time in his entire adult life, the wealthy billionaire took a simple plastic magnet and proudly displayed the colorful, messy artwork right on the front of his pristine stainless steel refrigerator. Every single time he went to the massive kitchen to pour himself a glass of cold water, he looked at that innocent drawing, and a genuine, unburdened smile effortlessly spread across his handsome face. As the quiet weeks smoothly and naturally transitioned into comfortable months, the comforting daily routine at the penthouse solidified into something that felt remarkably and beautifully like a real, functioning household. Mary efficiently and meticulously managed the cleaning and organization, but she also gradually let her heavy defensive guard down, occasionally joining Vincent and Abigail for an afternoon cup of warm tea or a shared, laughter-filled lunch. Vincent's overall physical demeanor softened dramatically. He laughed much more frequently, his tense posture relaxed entirely, and the lingering dark shadows of bitter isolation slowly vanished from his bright, intelligent blue eyes. One crisp Monday morning, Abigail bounded energetically into the sunlit living room, eagerly telling Vincent a wildly exaggerated, highly entertaining story about a resilient three-legged tabby cat named Tripod. She explained that the tough feline belonged to their elderly, incredibly sweet neighbor in Queens, Mrs. Lawson, who often baked them fresh chocolate chip cookies when Mary was running extremely late from her demanding work. Vincent listened to the mundane tale with absolute, rapt fascination, realizing just how much he truly cherished learning about the intricate, beautiful human details of their humble, everyday lives, far beyond the luxurious penthouse walls. Noticing a critical, concerning detail during one of their long, rambling conversations, Vincent politely called Mary into his private wood-paneled home office to seriously discuss a rather sensitive, important subject. He gently inquired why a girl as bright as Abigail was spending her days in the penthouse instead of attending a formal educational program with children her own specific age. Deeply ashamed, Mary cast her tired eyes downward, quietly and painfully, explaining that the local public schools were severely, dangerously overcrowded, and she simply lacked the financial funds to ever afford a decent private education. Refusing to let the brilliant, shining little girl fall behind in life, Vincent immediately and firmly offered to fully sponsor Abigail's entire education at a prestigious, highly rated private academy located just a few short blocks away. He absolutely insisted on covering the outrageously expensive tuition, the tailored school uniforms, the daily safe transportation, and all necessary school supplies, beautifully framing the massive expense simply as a necessary investment in a very bright future. Overwhelmed by his staggering, unbelievable generosity, Mary wept openly and freely, finally accepting the miraculous gift, only after making him solemnly promise that she could slowly pay him back over the coming years. When Abigail bravely started her classes at the elite, demanding academy, she brought home endless, thrilling tales of new, wonderful friendships, difficult math problems, and exciting playground adventures every single afternoon. Vincent eagerly and patiently helped her with her nightly homework assignments, carefully explaining complex reading concepts and turning tedious, boring mathematical equations into fun, engaging puzzles that she lived to solve. Mary watched the two of them bond over textbooks and pencils with a complex mixture of profound gratitude and lingering disbelief, constantly marveling at exactly how naturally this powerful, wealthy man had stepped into a devoted paternal role. As the school year progressed, a new minor character entered their daily conversations. Mr. Harrison, Abigail's incredibly kind and encouraging homeroom teacher who constantly praised her remarkable intelligence and overflowing creativity. Vincent found himself actively participating in parent-teacher dynamics from afar, helping Abigail build an impressive, highly detailed papier-mâché volcano for Mr. Harrison's science fair that eventually won the prestigious first-place ribbon. He felt an immense, swelling pride in his chest whenever the young girl succeeded, experiencing the pure, selfless joy of parenthood that he had completely convinced himself he would never, ever be allowed to feel. During a quiet, peaceful afternoon, while Abigail was busy learning at school, Vincent gently and respectfully asked Mary about the little girl's biological father and his complete, glaring absence from their challenging lives. Mary's narrow shoulders visibly tensed as she painfully revealed that the cowardly man had cruelly abandoned them the exact, terrifying moment he discovered she was unexpectedly pregnant, leaving her to face the harsh world completely alone. Vincent expressed his deep, genuine sorrow for her painful, traumatic past, but firmly and passionately stated that she was an incredible mother, and that Abigail was incredibly lucky to have her as a guiding light. Later that same week, Abigail was specifically tasked with drawing a detailed picture of her family for an important social studies assignment in Mr. Harrison's brightly decorated classroom. Without a single moment of hesitation, she drew Mary holding her left hand, and Vincent sitting happily in his sticker-covered wheelchair holding her right hand, placing them all under a big, protective rainbow. When Abigail brought the highly graded assignment home and proudly showed it to Vincent, the wealthy billionaire had to quickly excuse himself, locking himself in the bathroom to quietly weep over the monumental weight of the child's innocent, beautiful declaration of family. The fragile, beautiful piece of their newly chosen family was abruptly and violently shattered when Vincent's fiercely protective, highly suspicious aunt, Lydia Montgomery, decided to drop by the penthouse entirely unannounced. At 58 years old, Lydia was a formidable, elegant woman who had raised Vincent since his parents tragically passed away, and her deep love was heavily wrapped in suffocating, paranoid layers of intense overprotection. Using her emergency spare key, Lydia silently walked through the echoing marble corridors and stopped dead in her tracks when she reached the entrance of the sunlit, toy-scattered living room. There, she found her incredibly wealthy, highly respected nephew, sitting awkwardly on the plush, expensive carpet, laughing loudly and joyfully as he clumsily built a massive, colorful tower of plastic blocks with a young, unfamiliar child. Mary, wearing her simple, practical cleaning uniform, was quietly organizing books on the mahogany shelves, occasionally looking over at their heartwarming scene with a soft, incredibly loving smile playing on her lips. The towering plastic structure suddenly collapsed with a loud crash, causing Abigail to erupt into a fit of pure giggles, a magical sound that was immediately silenced by Lydia's sharp, demanding voice echoing from the grand doorway. Lydia demanded to know exactly what was happening in the residence, her sharp, aristocratic voice dripping with elitist suspicion as she glared at Mary's modest uniform and Abigail's scattered, inexpensive toys. Mary hastily stood up, respectfully and nervously introducing herself and her young daughter, while Vincent defensively explained the unique, highly successful daily arrangement they had successfully maintained for several wonderful months. Refusing to accept his calm, rational explanation, Lydia aggressively ordered Mary to take the child into the kitchen immediately so she could speak with her nephew in strict, uninterrupted, completely private isolation. Once the heavy wooden office doors were securely closed, Lydia unleashed a terrifying torrent of harsh, biting accusations, loudly insisting that Mary was a cunning, highly experienced opportunist exploiting a vulnerable, wealthy disabled man. She fiercely argued that bringing an adorable, innocent child into the workplace was a calculated, deeply manipulative tactic designed solely to soften Vincent's heart and eventually drain his massive, closely guarded bank accounts. Vincent fiercely and passionately defended them both, shouting at the top of his lungs that Mary and Abigail were the only people in the entire world who treated him like a normal human being rather than a broken, tragic cash register. Unconvinced by his passionate, emotional defense and deeply terrified for his financial safety, Lydia secretly hired an elite, highly expensive private investigator named Mr. Davis to thoroughly dig into every hidden corner of Mary's past. For one entire week, the seasoned, cynical detective meticulously scrutinized her bank records, her previous employment history, her modest apartment lease, and her personal relationships in her quiet Queens neighborhood. He fully expected to uncover a long trail of deceit, hidden debts, or a documented history of targeting wealthy, vulnerable men, completely prepared to hand Lydia the damning evidence she desperately, hungrily craved. However, when Mr. Davis finally delivered his comprehensive, highly detailed report to the imposing matriarch, Lydia was intensely frustrated to discover that Mary Foster was absolutely, undeniably spotless in every single regard. The official report confirmed she was a hard-working, deeply honest mother who consistently paid her rent, volunteered at her local community center, and lived a quiet, highly respectable life focused entirely on raising her child. Despite the overwhelming, undeniable proof of Mary's innocence, Lydia's deeply ingrained, toxic paranoia refused to yield, that the young mother was simply a terrifyingly skilled master of deception, waiting to strike. Determined to forcefully sever the dangerous attachment before her beloved nephew got his fragile heart completely broken, Lydia deliberately visited the penthouse on an afternoon she knew Vincent would be securely away attending a corporate board meeting. When Mary nervously opened the heavy front door, she instantly felt a chilling, terrifying wave of pure dread wash over her, immediately sensing the older woman's highly hostile, incredibly destructive intentions. Lydia confidently and aggressively strolled into the pristine kitchen, briefly and disdainfully glancing at Abigail's innocent drawings, before coldly instructing the bewildered child to go play quietly in a completely different room. Left entirely alone with the terrified, trembling housekeeper, Lydia launched a devastating, highly calculated psychological attack, accusing Mary of feeding Vincent dangerous, entirely unrealistic delusions of building a happy, functional family. She cruelly and relentlessly insisted that because they belonged to vastly different social and economic worlds, this temporary fantasy would inevitably shatter, leaving Vincent far more broken, depressed, and isolated than he was before she arrived. She aggressively demanded that Mary do the morally right thing and immediately vanish from his life forever, rather than selfishly stringing a severely disabled man along for her own temporary, pathetic financial comfort. The harsh, intensely cutting words struck Mary with the devastating, breathless force of a physical blow, violently awakening every deep-seated insecurity she harbored about her basic worth and her proper place in society. The following Monday morning, the sprawling penthouse was suffocatingly, terrifyingly quiet. Mary and Abigail simply did not arrive for work, and they aggressively ignored all of Vincent's increasingly desperate, panicked phone calls. Vincent spent 3 agonizing, endless days trapped in a dark spiral of rising panic and deep confusion, staring blankly at the colorful, childish stickers on his wheelchair and the echoing, terribly empty spaces they had left behind. He quickly and accurately deduced that his overbearing aunt was entirely responsible for their sudden, completely unexplained disappearance, and a cold, entirely unfamiliar fury began to boil deep within his chest. When Lydia confidently arrived later that week, fully expecting to find her nephew slowly recovering from the necessary, painful separation, she was met with pure, unbridled, explosive rage that literally shook the windows. Vincent confronted her with a fierce, terrifying intensity she had never witnessed, explicitly detailing how her toxic, overbearing protection was actually a cruel prison that had been slowly, methodically suffocating his very soul. He passionately confessed that before Mary and Abigail walked into his life, he was merely existing in a permanent state of emotional death, and her cruel, calculated interference had violently stolen the only true happiness he had ever known. Hearing the raw, devastating, undeniable agony breaking in his voice, Lydia's impenetrable armor of suspicion and elitism finally, irreparably cracked, revealing the deeply flawed, highly destructive picture of her misguided protective instincts. She suddenly and painfully realized that in her relentless, obsessive quest to shield him from potential gold diggers, she had actively, purposefully denied him the very essence of a meaningful, truly loving human life. Ridden with profound crushing guilt and deep shame for her terrible actions, Lydia secretly contacted the commercial cleaning agency to obtain Mary's residential address, fiercely determined to fix the terrible, heartbreaking mistake she had made. Her chauffeured luxury car carefully navigated the unfamiliar, narrow, bustling streets of Queens, eventually stopping securely in front of a modest, slightly weathered brick apartment building. She slowly climbed the narrow stairs and knocked heavily on the peeling door, finding Mary looking utterly exhausted, her eyes red, swollen, and entirely devoid of light from days of relentless, silent crying. Although Mary was understandably terrified by the unexpected, intimidating visit, she politely allowed the wealthy, imposing woman to step inside her impeccably clean, incredibly tiny living room. To Mary's absolute shock, the notoriously proud, unbending Lydia Montgomery humbly bowed her graying head and offered a sincere, tearful, deeply remorseful apology for her incredibly cruel, highly destructive behavior. Lydia openly and painfully confessed her lifelong, paralyzing fear of seeing Vincent used and discarded, admitting that her deeply rooted cynicism had completely, tragically blinded her to the genuine, beautiful love blossoming right in front of her. Lydia desperately begged Mary to forgive her terrible ignorance and to bravely return to the penthouse, passionately arguing that true, enduring love and family never recognize the artificial, meaningless boundaries of wealth or class. Just as Mary was quietly processing the staggering, unbelievable reversal, little Abigail emerged slowly from the bedroom, holding a fresh, highly colorful drawing depicting the 3 of them holding hands tightly. Looking at her daughter's deeply hopeful eyes and listening to Lydia's desperate, tearful pleas, Mary finally realized that running away out of fear was a much greater, more permanent tragedy than staying and fighting for their happiness. With a tremulous, incredibly relieved smile, Mary quickly packed a small overnight bag, took Abigail's small, warm hand in hers, and bravely followed the older woman back down to the waiting luxury car. When the private elevator doors finally slid open at the penthouse, Vincent was staring blankly out the massive window, his broad shoulders slumped in total, devastating defeat. At the familiar, joyful of Abigail's loud shout, he spun his motorized wheelchair around, hot tears instantly blurring his vision as the little girl sprinted across the massive room and practically tackled him with a fierce hug. Mary walked in slowly behind her, her own eyes shining with thick, unshed tears, and Vincent reached out desperately, pulling her down into a clinging, powerful embrace that communicated absolutely everything words could not. In the highly emotional presence of his quietly weeping aunt and the little girl holding tightly onto his chair, Vincent looked deeply into Mary's beautiful eyes and made a bold, completely unwavering declaration. He stated firmly that he no longer wanted her there as an employee, but strictly as his equal, his beloved partner, and the permanent, irreplaceable center of his world, sealing their bond with a deeply passionate kiss. 5 years smoothly and joyfully passed, and the once sterile, painfully silent penthouse was now wonderfully, completely unrecognizable, practically bursting with vibrant life, endless laughter, and cozy, incredibly happy domestic chaos. Abigail, now a bright, highly confident, and fiercely intelligent 10-year-old, regularly left a messy trail of muddy soccer cleats, scattered science projects, and brightly colored backpacks near the lavish marble entryway. Vincent woke up every single morning to the delightful, comforting smell of fresh buttermilk pancakes, happily listening to his beautiful wife humming cheerfully as she skillfully navigated their busy, sunlit kitchen. Mary and Vincent had been happily, wonderfully married for 3 incredible years. Their deep, entirely unwavering partnership fundamentally and permanently transforming both of their lives entirely for the better. 2 years ago, Vincent officially and legally adopted Abigail in a highly emotional, deeply touching courthouse ceremony where the seasoned judge himself actually shed a tear at the child's heartfelt, pure declaration of eternal love. Even stern Aunt Lydia had completely and wonderfully reinvented herself, eagerly shedding her icy, intimidating societal armor to officially become the most devoted, indulgent, and fiercely loving grandmother any child could ever possibly ask for. During a chaotic, laughter-filled Tuesday morning breakfast, Abigail eagerly chattered about her upcoming science fair project, mentioning that her best friend Jasmine was coming over later to help meticulously build a massive, highly explosive papier-mâché volcano. Vincent effortlessly managed the lively, overlapping conversation, expertly maneuvering his decorated wheelchair around the massive kitchen island to pour fresh orange juice and affectionately ruffle his growing daughter's untamed, bouncy curls. He felt an overwhelming, powerful surge of deep gratitude, marveling at how incredibly naturally he had adapted to the demanding, beautiful, thoroughly exhausting role of a dedicated, highly involved father. After Abigail rushed excitedly out the heavy front door to catch her private school bus, Mary poured 2 large cups of hot coffee and comfortably settled right onto Vincent's lap. A perfectly familiar routine. She wrapped her soft arms tightly around his neck, looking deeply into his bright, happy eyes, and softly, almost shyly suggested that they should seriously consider expanding their little family with another beautiful baby. Vincent's heart completely skipped a joyous, powerful beat as he enthusiastically and immediately agreed, pulling his smiling wife into a deep, incredibly passionate kiss that held the brilliant promise of an even brighter future together. Later that evening, the entire happy family gathered on the expansive, beautifully lit outdoor terrace, quietly watching the magnificent New York City skyline light up like a sea of diamonds against the darkening, purple twilight. Lydia was quietly reading a thick storybook to a thoroughly exhausted Abigail, while Mary rested her head gently on Vincent's sturdy shoulders, perfectly content and safe in the peaceful, highly comforting silence. Vincent looked around at the incredible, completely devoted people who actively and freely chose to love him every single day, reflecting deeply on the profound, incredible journey that had miraculously brought him from total despair to unimaginable joy. When it was finally time for everyone to head to bed, Vincent rolled his chair quietly into his daughter's bedroom, carefully pulling the warm, heavy blankets over her deeply sleeping, peaceful form. He whispered a tender, loving goodnight, lightly kissing her warm forehead, feeling endlessly, profoundly grateful for the specific, magical moment 5 years ago when she bravely crossed a crowded ballroom to change his life forever. Returning to his own master bedroom, he found his loving wife patiently waiting for him, her warm, comforting presence an absolute, undeniable testament to the beautiful, incredibly rich life they had painstakingly built together. As he looked at the distant city lights reflecting beautifully in the thick glass, Vincent understood a profound, deeply human truth that perfectly captured his entire extraordinary, challenging journey. True wealth is never found in the cold, meaningless accumulation of money, expensive properties, or the highly fleeting, entirely superficial approval of high society. It is exclusively found in the deep, vulnerable, intensely genuine connections we bravely forge with others. When we stubbornly allow our physical limitations or the harsh, unforgiving judgments of society to build high defensive walls around our hearts, we actively deny ourselves the greatest, most fulfilling joy existence has to offer. Life's most monumental, permanently transformative changes rarely ever arrive boldly disguised as grand, sweeping events. They usually manifest softly as simple, innocent gestures of pure acceptance, much like a small child bravely extending a hand and simply asking for a dance. By consciously choosing immense courage over paralyzing fear and actively embracing open love over bitter isolation, we inevitably discover that our greatest disabilities are merely the emotional barriers we falsely impose upon ourselves, and breaking them down beautifully reveals the truest, most complete human experience possible.